Good evening and welcome to Naples United Church of Christ. My name is Dawson Taylor and I serve as senior minister. I want to welcome you to the second of 8 weeks of our sacred conversations on race and privilege. I must admit that when we developed the outlines of these conversations, I was most excited about tonight, because it is a privilege to welcome a dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Justin Coleman, who serves as senior pastor of University United Methodist Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Justin and I did part of our growing up together. He is 1 year older than me, which I like to remind him of often, and I've always looked up to him as a big brother type figure. Justin was class president a year ahead of me, and so I wanted to be class president. Justin was in the marching band, so I wanted to be in the marching band. Reverend Coleman attended Southern Methodist University, graduating in 2000 with a major in religious studies. He too was also active in SMU's Wesley Foundation and served as associate pastor at SMU's Wesley Foundation from 2001 to 2003. As he began seminary studies at Perkins School of Theology. Justin transferred to Duke Divinity School in 2003 and graduated with a Master of Divinity in 2005. In 2007, Justin was called back to Texas, where he was appointed associate pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Houston. For 6 years, from 2008 until 2014, Justin served as the executive and lead pastor of the Gethsemane campus of St. Luke's Church. From 2014 to 2017, Justin served as the chief ministry officer of the United Methodist Publishing House in Nashville, Tennessee. In June of 2017, Justin was appointed to his current role as senior pastor of University United Methodist Church in Chapel Hill. He and his wife Chaka live there with their 3 sons, Zan, Max, and Lawson. My friend, it is wonderful to see you. And as I was saying before we went live, that, the last time we were together in a ministry setting was 7 years ago this week.
Yes.
When I had you at my church in Dallas, where I was serving as executive minister, and that congregation was in between senior ministers. And after you preached, everyone thought you were going to be the next senior minister. So I'm a little intimidated to introduce you to this congregation. At least I am the senior minister, and they have me under contract. So it takes a lot to fire me, I guess. But it's so fantastic to see you, buddy.
It's great to see you as well. And I'm glad that you mentioned that moment 7 years ago, because our family was just reflecting on it and how wonderful it was to be with you and with that congregation. Yeah. And we wanted to stay. So,
Well, I was reflecting on that today, because it was right before I came here. It was actually just a couple weeks before I came here to interview to become the associate. So it was such a pivotal time in both of our lives. But I know that from my life and knowing you, that schedules are intense. So I truly appreciate you taking time. You all are working remotely, correct? Doing online worship?
We are, yes. Still, North Carolina has been a bit more cautious around reopening, and the faith community in our area has kind of locked arms and said that we are going to continue to do remote worship and remote work for a while.
Okay.
So maybe even for the balance of the year, and as far as worship is concerned.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I know that's certainly managing a lot. Well, I want to, if you're willing, let's dive in, because we're, as you and I have talked, I serve a context here, actually. I think your context is more diverse, but still predominantly white, but we'll get to that later in our conversation. But I serve a context here that is predominantly, overwhelmingly white, median age 74, an affluent zip codes that here in Collier County. And so last week when we began this conversation, we talked about the fact that this is a conversation that's being brought up because of the times that we're living in, and we're trying to respond to the need that we feel is not only in our culture but in our congregation. And so the question that we asked our panelists last week was, do you believe that we're living in a watershed moment? And if so, or if not, what do you think has brought us to this moment in our nation's history?
I believe that we may be in a watershed moment, and the factors that have brought this together are at least several, and probably many more than I can articulate right now. But as I look at not only what's happening in our country, but what's happening across the globe, as people reckon with the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you have folks in England taking statues of slave traders and tossing them into, there's something going on there. And so, why now?
Mm-hmm.
There have been numerous um, tragedies, attacks, killing, and from perpetrated against members of the Black community. And so, what's the difference now? Um, why have we all of a sudden had enough?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one reason might be the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So we are all sensitive to our own needs, where there's a increased level of empathy all around, and people are, in some places, still isolating or self-isolating, and so they've got time to actually sit and consider what's going on. The length of the footage of George Floyd's murder, for those who watched it, it took me a while to get over.
Yeah.
I didn't immediately want to watch, but I thought, and it took me a while to get over, and I think that's impacted many people, and part of it is, I think, the length of it.
Mm-hmm.
Length of that video. And so I think you've got just a couple things working together, where in this empathetic moment, when people are in touch with their own sense of pain, and then this very tragic, violent murder, violent in a way, in its own eerily calm way, in the way in which the officer knelt upon him. I think everyone said, just enough's enough. This is,
Yeah.
I can't, people could not justify it.
Yeah.
Many people couldn't justify it. And so, it had a ripple effect. And
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm really fascinated. I appreciate your insight about the fact that the COVID-19 presented a time in which, life is, well, it's so much different. And for many of us, I think many of us with privilege, it is sitting still.
yes.
Yes. I'm sitting still in a different way. Like you, I think, working a lot, but it's a different kind of work, right? It's not,
Right.
it's a lot of Zoom meetings, not necessarily running
Right.
from different meetings. But, I also have thought, and we talked some last week, about the fact that COVID-19, I think, also created a sense of people had just had it. It was, we had this thing happening in our culture that we already felt so out of control, if you will. Like the economy was crashing around us. What we've always understood, you and I've talked about how we've led churches is crashing in around us, and what we've always understood. And so then on top of that, but I appreciate your insight, because I hadn't thought about it that way, that we couldn't just move past it.
Right.
Like for many of us, we had to stop and deal with it.
Had to sit with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's that's interesting about, and one of the reasons I wanted to invite you and ask you to be a part of this conversation is you and I grew up, I believe, you grew up your entire time of growing up. I grew up part of it because of my family moving, but we grew up in a classic large city suburb.
Yeah.
And we were just visiting, your mom and your brother are still there. My family's still in Houston, but in a different part of the city. So our paths, I think, are so interesting. You and I attended the same seminary, at least for part of the time. We're leading similar sized churches. And yet, you're black, I'm white, you're heterosexual, I'm gay. I just can't help but think that we've had such a similar path and yet such different journeys.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
whatever I titled this. I can't remember. I kept playing with that. Yeah, we've had different paths, but the same journey. And so I just wonder, obviously I have my sense of our growing up, but you probably have a very different one. And I don't know if we've ever talked about it through the lens of race.
No, I don't think we have. And yes, I think that it's interesting, Dawson, in that I think the journeys are very, very similar, and I tried so much in that context to um, I don't know how you want to say it, to move beyond stereotypes of a young black kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I think my family was self-conscious about this,
I imagine, yeah.
and so the ways that I tried to excel, the ways that I tried to lead um, from a very young age. I mean, this started in elementary school, in a way of saying, "Look, don't look down on me,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to do just as well as anybody else, or maybe even better." And so it's just so self-conscious about it. But it's actually been, interestingly enough, in the years since moving away, since graduating from high school, that I have learned the depths of the racism that was all around me.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if on my Facebook page I mention anything about race, and if I get any pushback, I can say 99% of the time it is someone that we grew up with.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised at how intense those reactions against whatever I'm saying are. And in many of the cases, those folks still live there or in the area.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so have continued to swim in those waters in the years since. It's just, but it was all around me, and I was constantly trying to escape its gravity.
Yeah. And were you conscious as we were growing up? I'm I'm really struck by your comment about attempting to escape its gravity. Were you conscious of that attempted escape as we were growing up?
I was, and it. I was, and I'd say that I still am.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I
It's
mean, yeah.
yeah, this sense of defying gravity is all of my life. I think, and so after a while, it was just second nature.
Hmm.
Um, but uh, I don't know. I can't remember a time when I wasn't self-conscious that I was clearly in a minority. I mean, certainly in high school it was a bit more diverse than before, but clearly still in a minority. Yet, um, um, well, it's not yet. Clearly in a minority, and just the feeling that everybody was always watching,
Yeah.
and that I could never. I don't know that my guard was ever really down.
Hmm.
I became comfortable with it,
Hmm.
but still self-conscious, and in a few ways, painfully reminded that I needed to be self-conscious.
Yeah. in the gay community, we have a term called internalized homophobia, meaning
Mm.
that we take a lot of that expectation, a lot of that fear, that sense of that we have to prove oneself, and we stuff it down, and that lives
Yeah.
itself out often in many
Yes.
unhealthy ways. Um, and there's a lot of really great sociological work on that. Is there, I hate to admit my ignorance, and so part of these conversations are about learning. Is there sociological work on conditions like that in minority communities,
Mm.
ethnic minority
Mm.
communities, or that
Yeah,
you're
that's so there's a lot. So there's a lot of I don't know if there's a phrase that's been given
right?
to it, but there is a lot of talk of this, and it's not only sociological. Um, it is in some ways the everyday talk of Black folk in community,
Yeah, I can imagine, right? Yeah,
um, uh, because there is a sense of being, one might say that uh, for the Black community, as well as the LGBTQ community, there's a double way of being in the world but not of the world.
right. Preach. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, as Christians, there's a level that we do that, but also, in other parts of identity, we do that, right?
right.
And so there's this, like, I'm existing in this white world, if you will, or this white culture, if you will, but I'm never completely of it. Why? Because I'm reminded that I'm not
Mhm.
of it. And so this is where you start talking about, code switching and
Mhm.
other kinds of things. I engage or I speak in one way
Right.
as I'm engaged in this larger culture, but then when I'm in the African American community or around more African Americans, I can let my hair down,
Right.
so to speak, and behave differently.
Yeah. And I
Um,
remember when you had hair. So yeah.
that's right. That's right. When I had him to let down, it's
Exactly.
no longer the case.
No, but no, I so appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to speak to these because, and we've heard some painful stories, I believe, and I've heard these stories, but I think they've really come to the forefront of these conversations across our culture about particularly Black fathers
Mm,
having conversations with their sons, and I'm sure there
yeah.
are broader conversations beyond that, but those are the ones that have really stood out about how to behave in
Hmm.
a culture to protect themselves for their
Yeah.
safety. Did your dad have conversations with
Oh
you and your
gosh.
brother about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, we uh, these conversations were happening as long as I can remember. In
So it
elementary,
was ongoing. It wasn't like
ongoing,
a
ongoing,
one time, but it was like an ongoing. Yeah.
ongoing. I in elementary school
Wow.
we're having these conversations. So I remember uh, there when in early on in elementary school, it was there's me and a couple other African American students in my class, one of which was my cousin. And so so we would and so there was a time when I had some crush, and my dad gave me a very serious talking to. I mean, I must have been in second grade.
Yeah.
And, I mean, so this is like a silly, a note, or second or third grade. So this is a note
Yeah,
with
this is like a check yes
do
or
you
no.
like me?
Yeah.
Yes or no kind of
Right.
thing. You know, you want to be in my group playing tag on the playground. So I don't know. So, but had a very serious conversation.
Yeah.
Now, some of the context there is, my dad grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Okay.
And he had an elder brother, and they were raised by my grandmother. My grandfather passed away when my dad was fairly young, natural causes. Um, but it was said that my uncle looked at a white woman from across the street, and so a lynching party was going to come to their home, and so under the cloak of night, they got out of there and left most of their stuff behind and moved away.
Wow.
And so these kinds of experiences never left my father. Is he was a civil rights organizer in Phoenix, and in his 20s, um, and so as successful as he may have been in his career in banking, and being in majority white settings, he always had cautionary tales.
Yeah.
um, and he'd say, "Look, I know you think that everyone here will treat you equally, and they think of you like everybody else, but son, they don't. And so you've got to learn to navigate this." And I hated it at first. I
Sure.
hated it because these are my friends.
Right.
Here, these are the only people around me.
Right.
So what am I gonna do if I have to constantly have, what we might call in theological terms a hermeneutic of suspicion? I've always,
Exactly.
there's always got to be that. How am I going to survive? Well,
You
you learn
survive.
to survive.
One of the things that strikes me about that conversation, especially having known your dad, is that it's not just his conversation with you is not just rooted in cultural or societal fears, but it was rooted in an experience of truth
That's
from
right.
his background. I
That's right.
mean, this was rooted in knowing and experiencing. Which I mean, I think back on that or reflect on that and think about how surreal that must have been and scary. For him, I
Yeah.
can't imagine at second grade or even elementary school that could have carried the same weight for you. Maybe it did, but I just think about the amount of fear that must have carried for your dad.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely, and I think that was the thing. I mean, he didn't want us to be hurt,
Sure.
and when we were able to, um, I'd ride my bike, back in those days, ride my bike around the whole area,
Right.
disappear for hours
Right.
with
Yeah.
friends, and he was, his sense was, look, if something goes down, they may treat you differently than everybody else, all even if you're in a gaggle of people. When we were driving and able to move about, look, son, here are areas of town that you can go to, here are areas of towns you just don't, because if something happens, you may be treated differently. And as much as there were times in my life that I just didn't want those things to be true, they were. Um, and I've worked in some of the places that
Yeah.
he gave me cautionary tales about, and they were well warranted.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
um, but I just, and so relating to, if I could tell another story relating to that experience, I talked about that crush there. Um, I couldn't go to the prom with with a friend.
Uh,
We were just friends. I'd, broken up with someone else, and so decided to go with a friend, and their parents wouldn't let me go, won't let them go with me because I was black, just because of that. Now, I'd been class president every year. I was a drum
I would say
major.
drum major. Yeah.
I was,
And were
I was
they that
checking
outright
off all the
about it?
boxes.
Yeah.
Say again?
Were they that outright about it? I mean, were they just
That outright. So
wow?
this person called and said, I mean, in tears, and
Of
said,
course.
"I can't go, and here's why."
Now that you mentioned that, I think you had told me that story, but I had forgotten it, and I think I frankly kind of blocked it out of my mind in hopes that it really wasn't true. But I had forgotten
Well,
about
it
that.
just, it was one of these examples of, and I use it because, because of the relationality of it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
because that was 1996.
Yeah,
in
1996
suburban Houston, Texas. I
in
mean,
suburban Houston, Texas,
yeah,
and so the thing was, it was just one of those examples where I had tried throughout my academic career to be there, out front, leading, doing well, upstanding, young man, and in any regard that anybody could speak of, in ways that people wouldn't even didn't even see. Just tried,
right,
and again, this is escaping a gravity,
right,
and but when push came to shove, I still, in the eyes of some, was just less than,
right,
no matter what,
right,
no matter what. And I tried to fight to prove otherwise in so many ways, but that was one of those fights that I just lost. I mean, and it wasn't, again, we were just friends, and I mean, it was really sad, but what angered me was just it on principle.
right. Of course.
wasn't I wasn't good enough, no matter how much.
Yeah, no matter what you did.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So thinking about those conversations that your dad had with you, you
Hmm.
have three amazing, fun sons. I mean,
Yeah.
going to dinner with you all is, I mean, it's just wild and fun. But, so I have to know, like, or I have to ask. I imagine that those conversations happen with your boys.
They do.
And remind
And
me of their ages now, because I was trying to do the math.
yeah, so our eldest is now is 14. He's about
Okay,
to go to high
that's.
school.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, he's about to go to high school. So he's 14. The middle son is 11,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
the younger is 6. Youngest is 6, um, and so in different levels, different age appropriate ways. Yes, we have these conversations, and certainly with the older two, we've had plenty, and they've had plenty with us.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that we've experienced over these last 3 years in the current setting, so we're in a very progressive town,
Hmm.
just self-consciously progressive. And they also, the slogan of the town is that we're the southern part of heaven. So we're in the progressive southern part of heaven.
I love it.
and um, and our children have experienced some of the most uncomfortable moments of racism, personally,
Hmm.
for them that they ever have.
Wow.
And this is the supposedly the most progressive place that we have ever lived.
Right.
Um, we've got rainbow doors in the front of our lawn. God's doors are open to all.
Yeah.
We've got another door that says Black Lives Matter. We've got, and this, and we're downtown,
Yeah.
and on the off the main drag, you can't miss that when you drive through town. I've had people say that they've knew that they could move here
Yeah.
because of those statements on this big steeple church. Um, so in a town that readily accepts that,
Hmm.
these messages, um, my kids still struggle. In fact, there's the second largest achievement gap in the country between black and white students right here in our town, in the entire country.
In the
Uh,
research triangle,
mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, that just surprised me. I mean, because I think about, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. I think of that area. I would think that really just surprises me.
One of the highest per capita PhDs
Right. Right.
in the country. And so here we are, and things have been said to my sons. They have observed the treatment of other black students and students of color, uh, and um, and so they're hurting, and they're coming home, and then they're asking questions about all the things that we see on a regular basis in the news, and then some things that we don't see in the news, but that they pick up and we pick up because we're listening to other black voices who are talking about things that are going on across our country and nearby.
Yeah. So it's not even, it goes beyond simply a, a conversation of preparation, but it's also a conversation about helping them unpack and deal with what they're experiencing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and I will say, conversations are amping up and need to amp up even more with our eldest. I mean, he's 14. He's already my height, maybe even a little bit taller. I think he might actually be watching right now, and so I've admitted it. Um,
Okay,
and
Zan, we heard it, and this will
yeah.
be archived, so we've got it. Just email me
Yeah.
if you need it.
And so, he has for a while, even in middle school, for a while, he just looked a lot older
Yeah.
than he actually is. And so, these conversations around how you interact with people who
Hmm.
are who believe themselves to be in authority,
Hmm.
either in the school or certainly with law enforcement officials. Uh, we've talked about all of these things, and it's not because we think that law enforcement officials are bad or corrupt to the core that we believe that the school administration, but I mean, bias and unconscious bias
Hmm.
there,
Right.
and it's real, and they've got to be aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because, and as a parent, that just, I mean, there just has to be a level of pain with,
Oh yeah.
having to have those conversations that, to me, take away a level of innocence from your child that perhaps, perhaps my nieces and nephews may not have to, a level of innocence they may not have to have taken.
Well, and part of it too is I so it's a level of innocence taken, and I lament that I'm having to have the same
Yeah.
conversations that my dad had with me.
Right.
One of the things that my dad said, and he's now of blessed memory, he passed away before we
Yeah.
come to preach at your church. I think that might have been it'd been about a little less than a year, maybe, or a
Right.
year.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and so one of the things that Dad said to me once is that as he was entering into some of these last stages of life, he said one of his hopes was that some of the pain of the experiences that he had growing up, and he shared some of it with us, but he said, I haven't shared all of it because I don't want you to have to carry all of it.
Yeah.
And he said, some of the beliefs and attitudes that I hold, speaking of himself and of his generation, he said, part of our gift to you is that we'll die, and some of this will die with us.
Wow.
And it was certainly a powerful conversation, and especially after he was on a battle with cancer at the time, and now I think, gosh, maybe some of those memories have might die away, but the context,
Hmm. Yeah.
what we continue to wrestle with, as far as dynamics around race in our country, feel like they're getting worse in some ways,
Right.
or moving in the opposite direction of the history that we like to believe
Right.
um, when we were growing up.
So I think about your dad's statement, and I find myself thinking it's not the memories that need to die, it's the context that have had to create those painful memories that we, particularly those of us with privilege, I think we need to find ways, that's, I think I shared with you, we're going to start a book study next week of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yes.
And, I think that's part of the intentional work that we want to do is, and so you've given me some framework to think about of, it's not that we want those memories that your father carried, and I just have these memories of your broad-shouldered father. He could carry a lot, I'm sure. But, it's not that those memories need to die, but the contexts
Yes.
that created some of those memories.
Yes.
And thinking about some of the power of language and those of us with privilege, and particularly those of us who are white, we talked some about this last week, but I'm curious to get some of your thoughts about, there's this, we talk around here a lot about language matters. And so there's the Black Lives Matter mantra, if you will, and movement. But then I think a lot, particularly in the white community, talk a lot about, I think up against that, talk about all lives matter.
Right.
And we had some great conversation, I feel like, last week about that. And I would be curious, in part, I want to get your opinion on this because you represent a different generation of conversation around this. And I'm just curious what your reaction to when you hear that up against one another. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, this is one of these things. So, when I hear all lives matter from the white community, white friends, congregants,
Yeah.
and so of course we believe that all lives matter, and certainly as Christian people, we believe that all lives matter. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Um, but the inability to say, or the great resistance to saying that Black Lives Matter, leads the Black community to wonder if you actually really mean that all lives matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like, why can't you say it? Why does it make you upset
Mm-hmm.
for it to be said? Well, and I hear things like, well, there's discriminated against. Yes, absolutely. And I'm absolutely against all forms of discrimination and prejudice. But what we're trying to do is to gather around a community that since the inception of this country, or this iteration of this country, we have said in so many ways that Black lives don't matter, or at least that they matter less.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is about, and y'all may have talked about this some, and you may have seen some conversation about this on the net, but I like the usage of the parable of the lost sheep as a way to talk about this. So in this parable, Luke 15, Jesus says, look, this good shepherd goes after the one lost sheep, because that sheep's life matters.
Yeah.
That's the one that is fragile, threatened by others, and so the good shepherd seeks to care about. It's not that all the 99 other sheep don't matter.
Yeah.
They do. And if one of those goes missing, the good shepherd is going to go after that one as well. So that's what the good shepherd does. But right now, we're talking about this particular sheep. And we're going to just go ahead and say they matter enough for the rest of the sheep to say, all right, shepherd, you go get them. We want them safe and sound and back in the fold too. We're gonna hang tight here.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's, I love that image. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, to continue thinking about that as a metaphor is, the rest of that story is that the good shepherd brings that sheep back into the fold and into community,
Right.
so to speak. I don't know that sheep have community. Let's assume that they do. But, and I think that's, to me, that's almost the hand in glove image there about Black Lives Matter and all lives matter, because I don't believe that one delineates or takes away from, denigrates away from the other, because when the good shepherd leaves, the good shepherd, Jesus, brings that missing sheep back into the fold. And so, one of the things that was said last week was, when all things are equal and on par, of course, all lives matter, but we are not there yet.
That's right.
And I that was something that really struck me and stuck with me this week. As I went about my week, I kept thinking a lot about, and it wasn't just about police brutality. It was about infant mortality rates and about the health of women, and it was a really helpful context, as well as you given us one. Excuse me.
Well, and I'd also say that there are multiple ways to think about it. I mean, if you and I were sitting in a conversation, well, like this one, and you asserted because you were feeling fragile because of whatever was going on in your life. If you said to me, and Justin, I matter.
Yeah.
I would affirm you.
Right.
I'd say absolutely, but it would be strange for me to say, all right, okay, but I matter too, okay?
Yeah. No. Yeah, exactly. I think that's important context. Yeah. And I think that's such an important reminder.
So, and if I did, you'd be surprised. You'd be off put. You'd tell somebody a story about it. Like, this guy is so self-concerned,
Right. Yeah.
that he couldn't really listen to me and my place of pain and struggle without making it about him.
Right. I think that's such an important point. Thank you. Speaking of cultural things and the Black Lives Matter, I think so much of that language and understanding has gotten wrapped up in issues around the police and police brutality, and so one of the mantras that has come to light really in the last week, or at least it feels to me, is this defund the police. So just as I did in middle school and high school, I still today process out loud. And so I've saved this to talk to you about. And that is, so here's my dilemma. I have had, as, again, a white male of privilege, mostly good interactions with police. We have a retired sheriff in this congregation. I had a neighbor when I first moved here in a condo who was a sheriff's officer who was wonderful. We have a thrift store that was robbed last year, and the sheriff's department was remarkably responsive and wonderful in helping, and actually a year later helped solve the crime. So we have police who genuinely make good efforts. Yeah. I don't think on whole that police are bad. Right. And yet, I have seen some police officers, including the most recent incidents, two incidents in Atlanta, where police officers have made really poor decisions. Right. But we were talking about it in our clergy team meeting, I think it was this week, it might have been last week. I know ministers that have made really poor decisions, but I like most ministers that I deal with.
Right.
And so, I think about it back in, and so I just keep thinking to myself that the mantra of defund the police is really encapsulated to what we really want to do is do it differently.
That's right.
And modern day policing, I'm clear, has its roots in enforcing enslavement. If you go back, that's where it was founded, and so I think I still have some things to figure out about that. Jim Crow South, the Great Migration, so I'm clear it has racist roots systemically, and that we've got to figure some things out. But again, that's from my vantage point of white privilege. Right. So push back, call me names, I don't know, tell me, where am I on that?
So this is, and I'm an external processor too. Really.
So everyone else is just hostage to us figuring this out.
Yeah, they're just held hostage to this. So defund the police. It is. I do think you're absolutely right. At the core of it, what we're saying is, something needs to be done differently. Maybe this could trigger different behaviors. So if we, so essentially, if we create other, if other supports are brought into the community, um, other disciplines were better funded, that they could
Mm-hmm.
take care of some of the stresses on the community. Yeah, I mean, I think innovation is good, and it probably it's high time for us to innovate in this area. I There are law enforcement officials that I've always known, and of course are in every congregation that I've ever served, and so I'm not walking around carrying a banner around defunding the police. And here's the reason. So that is, as if we want to police our community, or create if we want to create a context of safety for our community in different ways, if we want to think differently about that, good. Yes, we should always be innovating in these kind of ways in the midst of our communities. But if the same mentalities are carried through, no matter who is doing the work, you're still going to get negative results.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I want is for people to not just say, "Well, we want somebody else creating interventions rather than the police." I, I want to know what's going on in the somebody else's heart as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so what's true is that there the statistically, just as a statistical incidence, there is a higher incidence of negative interactions with law enforcement officials in the Black community over against other communities. Just statistically, we're just talking statistics here. And so part of it is, yes, there's a higher frequency. Well, is that because of is that due to the field of work that is policing? I don't think it is. I think police officers um, have the authority to treat African Americans in certain ways, where if there is resistance, there will be negative consequences. But it's not the vocation or the field of work that is policing that causes it. There might be some toxic things that it allows,
Mm-hmm.
but what causes it are is racism that exists in our culture, in our society.
Right.
I mean, that's the root of it. So if we're not getting at the root of it, then there will be different kinds of abuses from different kinds of people at the end of the day, and that's my major concern here, is that we've got to get at some of the root causes here and rethink and repent of the frameworks around race that we have believed either consciously or unconsciously all of our lives.
Yeah. I find myself hearkening back to an earlier part of our conversation where what I want really deep down is systems and systemic understandings where your sons don't have to have those conversations with your grandchildren. I mean, that's what I want. And,
Right.
and so I think we have to find ways, all of us, white, black, gay, straight, whatever isms we put on one another. I want us to find ways to create those contexts, as your father would have said, where we continue the stories, we tell the powerful stories, but we end the contexts that create those painful stories.
Right.
And where your sons don't have to tell your grandchildren any longer to be afraid or to act differently with people of authority. And and I'm just high-minded and naive enough to want to figure out what that looks like.
Well, we've
Go
got
ahead,
to.
excuse me.
No, I was just going to say we've got to. We've absolutely got to work at what it means to, as individuals, as a society, as institutions, be anti-racist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we chose that book was it doesn't feel like it's enough. I mean, it's such a well and high regarded book and scholarly work, but it doesn't feel like enough to just say I want to not be racist. It is I want to be anti-racist. And it's dense stuff in places, and it's painful stuff in places. You have to face some demons, I think, if you're honest. But it's such important work and such important an important read. We're drawing near our to concluding our time together, and you talked about the video of George Floyd losing his life, and I'm like you, I'll never forget. I don't think coming home on that Monday night, I was up late. The video started breaking the news, and now we have new footage from Atlanta. We have protests. I mean, there's so much happening, and so I've just have honestly admitted I can't watch the news anymore because it's just so disheartening. And so I find other ways to get my news. And so last week we ended with this question, and so I want to ask it of you because I think it's really important to put some positivity in the world. So where do you find hope today, like in these days that we're living in? Because I think it's so easy to be overwhelmed with COVID-19, protests, recession, all these things. But where do you find hope?
I always, well, one, and one would suspect that I'd say this. I mean, I truly believe the gospel, and part of that is the belief that everyone can be transformed, everybody can be saved from the most ingrained sin.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
there can be life transformation, and so the gospel compels me to continue to have hope for the world, though I will say that there are times when my hopefulness has become fragile over the last weeks. But apart from that, I always, or not apart from it, connected to that, I find hope in relationships. And so I'm finding a tremendous amount of hope in all the people that I'm in connection with that are trying to do that deep soul searching work. They're asking themselves daily now, how is racism manifesting in my life and in the lives of people around me?
Yeah.
They're trying to do the hard work, trying to figure out what it might mean to live differently and lean in to the conversation, but not only lean into the conversation to do something about it. So it's one thing to commit conceptually to being anti-racist, but unless you're willing to be confrontational with yourself and with aspects of society, you're not going to get there. And I'm seeing a new willingness on the part of some to be more confrontational, and I think that makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate it, and I truly appreciate your time, and I wish you and Shaka and the boys all the happiness and health that I can, and a cool Chapel Hill summer. And I hope that you continue to be safe during this time of pandemic. And I will look forward to connecting in person when we can do so safely. And again, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your witness. Thank you for your ministry. And most of all, thank you for your friendship all these years. And Mom and Dad send their love, as do Colin and Anna and their families. And I think they are watching as well. And go Mustangs! I don't know,
That's right.
but
That's right.
but I wish you all the best, and truly grateful for what you mean to me and what you mean to our world.
Well, and I want to reciprocate, if I could, for just a moment, and let everyone who's listening know that, uh, one of the major reasons that I'm a committed Christian today and a pastor in the church is because of Dawson Taylor. This is a guy, when we were in middle school, kept on hounding me to come to youth group with him, and my parents would drop me off at church and to youth group, and then they would, which, by the way, that first youth group, I ended up coming home with lipstick on that was applied, and that's a whole other story.
I was going to say that's a different story,
Yeah,
different
we can we
different
can we can laugh
conversation.
about that at another Zoom meeting. But started going, and then started going on Sunday mornings, and the ways that you helped me to walk that journey, and your dad and your family. I'm in this place today in large part because of you and your witness. So thank you, my brother.
Well, it's great to see you, and look forward to again seeing you soon. And take care.
Thanks, you too.
All right. And I want to invite you back to join us next Wednesday at 5 p.m. as we start our book study of how to be an anti-racist. And also, of course, to be back in worship at 10 a.m. this Sunday via live stream and Facebook Live. I'll be preaching, and of course, Father's Day and lots going on. So we hope that you will be back with us. And thanks for being with us tonight and being a part of these sacred conversations. We'll see you soon.